we have a tremendous and sacred power inside ourselves, that can inspire us, right? And evolve us. And so for me, it's about kind of reclaiming power and bringing the power back to yourself, and therefore judging yourself, not so much on the audience and the ratings and the how many 5-star reviews. So much of that is out of our control. But to judge ourselves based on that we've made our offering, the sincerity of that offering, the effort behind it, the learning around it, that there's actually a learning curve, right? That's how we judge ourselves.
Aside from my soul. Welcome to the Inspired Evolution. And we have with us someone really special today. We have with us Dr. Rick Hanson. Rick, how are you there today, sir?
I'm good and jacked up. I hear the power yell. That's pretty cool. I've done a lot of podcasts and nobody's ever done that one, so that's super.
They don't really start like that, do they? Normally,
I could say they ought to.
Yeah, they ought to. Oh wow, I take a lot of heart from that. Thank you so much. Right. That means a lot to me coming from you. For those tuning into Rick for the first time, Dr. Rick Hanson is a psychologist, senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center, and New York Times best-selling author. Dude, you guys need to get around the books. Neurodharma, Buddha's Brain, Steadying Your Mind, Training Your Brain for Happiness, Hardwiring for Happiness, Resilient. There are some really incredible bodies of work there. If I'm honest, I haven't gotten through all of them myself. So the place I'd like to start, Rick, is to, you've written lots of books on, mindfulness, resilience, and one's relationship with themselves. But here you've taken the time and opportunity to write actually a book that I love the format of which you've written it, and we can discuss that a little bit into the episode as well. But a book about the other, a relationship with others. What inspired you to write this book? Was there something is this something that's of personal for you?
Yeah. A combination of things. So first, in some of my other books, I did include maybe a chapter about relationship skills, but not any kind of a coherent book. Second, as a very long time therapist with couples, families, and individuals, I've had the experience many, many times, hundreds of times really, where someone will basically say, but I don't know what to do next, right? I say, I do this, they do that, and then I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to think about it, or I don't know what to do, including with people who are really quite challenging. So they don't know what to do next. And I thought, hey, this is a book full of, as you said, 50 very simple, direct things you can do next with what you think and what you say, essentially. The third thing that came together for me is the time that we're in, which is on the one hand full of opportunity, full of really positive developments that are easy to overlook, including podcasts like yours, and yet also involve this deep question of how do we live together? How do we live together in our couples and our families, with our neighbors, with our political adversaries, as a whole single human tribe, 8 billion of us around the world? How do we live together? So I zeroed in on the practical how of this book. That's what it's fundamentally about.
Do you find it's interesting that you mentioned the juxtaposition there, like just the freedom of access that we have to such incredible information, but also the challenges of this new time. And I'm speaking personally from I'm the father of a 16-month-old now, 16-month-old little boy.
So
And
cool.
thank you. And it's been I try to empower as many people as I possibly can. That's part of the intention of the show. And I'm looking around at just the life that's required here in Australia. Maybe it's different in the States over there, to be able to facilitate a really wholesome living for my son in just, what society expects, which a lot of Inspired Evolution about shedding all that like water off a duck's back, and yet just simple things like education, daycare, it doesn't even feel like we're keeping up with the Joneses. It's just the basic stuff. requires, myself to be working, my wife to be working, and then it's like, but we're not spending time with the children. It's like, okay, if we're not spending time with him, then who's spending time with him? And we're really fortunate to have grandparents that live really close by. But I'm looking at this, it's like, I know plenty of people that don't have this luxury. And I'm looking at this new nuclear family setup, and asking the question, where is the village that it takes and where is the tribe, because Inspired Evolution as an audience base definitely builds a tribe and an audience, and I'm so grateful for them in every way. And yet there's those moments where it's like, okay, it's Friday night and me and my wife want to go out to dinner. Can someone look after the baby for 2.5 hours? And you're looking around, it's like, oh no, baby's coming with us. And there's just not that available to us anymore. So can you tell us a little bit more about the current challenges that you foresee for interrelating and relationships in the world at the moment?
You brought up so much that's deep there. And my very first book is called Mother Nurture, which is really about the long-term health and well-being of the people who are doing all of the bearing and much, if not most, of the rearing of our children, which requires the support of a good partner, or at a minimum, a village it takes to truly raise a child, as you say, but which unfortunately these days looks a lot like a ghost town. So I'm very, very connected, including related, to our own kids who are now 35 and 32. They're, as a friend of mine once said to me when our son was maybe around your son's age, he said, "Don't worry, Rick, it'll end soon, in about 25 years." Anyway, you're in for the long ride, dude. As we used to say in the psychedelic days, you ate it, you ride it.
You ate it, you ride it.
So,
I'm definitely riding it.
All that said,
yeah,
you're of course exactly right. And I find it's actually helpful to contrast our modern lives with those of our Stone Age hunter-gatherer ancestors, which is to say those human beings, just like you and me, who lived 97% of the 300,000 years that our species, you and me, have walked the earth. So they lived in small bands that were grounded on what scientists called caring and sharing, or we could call compassion and justice, as the basis for life within their bands. Right. Against other bands, there was often a lot of brutal and violent aggressiveness or defense against aggressiveness. Okay, but inside their band at least, there was a foundation of caring and sharing, compassion and justice. Then along came agriculture, other developments, larger populations, and growing concentrations of wealth and power that have led to more or less Game of Thrones for most people ever since. Certainly some good things have been happening in the last few centuries. I'd rather be born into the next year than 100 years ago or even 10 years ago, and I'll take my chances, in the lottery, as it were, and whose life will you have. On the other hand, boy, we have a long way to go. And so I find it's really helpful to realize that the things we can do inside our own minds, inside our key relationships, and then inside our communities and societies and the whole human tribe as a whole. And they're different things. Meanwhile, there's a lot we can do inside ourselves, no matter how important it is to change society for the better. And I'm seriously committed to that, and have helped to found what's called the Global Compassion Coalition. You and your listeners should check it out, globalcompassioncoalition.org, which is a growing movement worldwide aiming to become big enough to be strong enough to drive systemic change at the global scale in a way that's historically unprecedented. So I'm serious about that. Meanwhile, I got a wife, right? I got 2 adult kids. I got a neighbor. I got, business, people, right? There's some kind of line supposedly from Jean-Paul Sartre, hell, these other people. It's not totally true, right? But so there's stuff to do. So I wanted to write a book that was hyper practical at that level. Well, meanwhile, I'm very engaged in political action and serious efforts at systemic change at a global scale.
Yeah. I love that. It's not going to make any sense in this context, but there's an Indian saying that goes along the lines, and I'm going to completely butcher it because when I translate things from my mother tongue to English, it just doesn't sound the same. But they say, the sadness of grief doesn't kill you. The virtues of your strength and the endeavors don't kill you. But then it's really poetic and really rhyming, and goes, the world doesn't kill you, but the people of the world will end up killing you. And it's like, it has this real energy around it. So it's like that, yeah, hell is other people sort of vibe. It's like, yeah. But I really appreciate what you're saying. And I will put a link to the Global Compassion Coalition .org in the show notes below for people to check out. And it's, I find, where your book really, stood out for me is probably the right word to say, but it sounds like I'm gassing it up because I can, but I can, so I will. But we've got topics here. It starts with befriending yourself, then warming the heart, being at peace with others, standing up for yourself, then speaking wisely, and then loving the world, which goes all the way from, just being loyal to yourself, all the way through to voting. And I was like, whoa, like, it just the intention with which you said, let's start as close as home to possible. And then let's spread it as far, like, almost like a mycelium network, as far as the tendrils can go,
There you go.
And I love the way the book is written, because each chapter is like, in some cases 3 to 4 pages, which is just, okay, I need help with that. And boom, I can just, just tune into that. And it's just so digestible. And I think, given the modern mind and the the challenges for attention we have, and the speed that we're used to, whether that's good for us or not, that's a whole other conversation. I think it's really really well written, and like you said, it's just super practical, and it's exercise. It's like, this is what's going on, this is the exercise, go, like, this is what you need. And I guess where I wanted to start going into that was, I've noticed, again, diving into my own experience at the moment, becoming a father, I've had these challenges where the lack of sleep has been really interesting. And what's happened is, as the lack of sleep has come down, the resilience has come down with the lack of sleep.
For sure.
And this is me getting very, in need of a better way of putting it, left brain about what I feel like is a right brain thing. I feel like it's actually a bit of a spiritual thing that happens to us, because as it's coming down, I've always been, with the Inspired Evolution, focused on what are your gifts, what are your strengths, double down on them, let's go. Life is short, you've got one opportunity, hurry up in some way, like, let's get what you're here to do done, and then allow what's coming next to happen. And so I've been very focused on what, in some spiritual sense, people may say the light, right? Like, what is your light? Let's go, let's hammer down on it. And as the sleep has come down, as the resilience has come down, I'll be left in my own, like you said, the Inspired Evolution, you've got the Global Compassion Coalition. There's all this work that we're doing out in the world. But then I was sitting at home and I was just tired, and I was just spent, and I'd just be sitting there, and my wife would ask me a simple question, and I'd be like, and you've got a whole, you've got a whole chapter on tone, which I love, by the way, which is really
by the
helpful.
way, is better than what? Okay, so good so far. Okay,
it could be worse. Thank you. I needed to hear that actually a little bit. But then there's like those moments where it's like I'm just grunting responses, and I'm just I can feel I'm cold, I'm apathetic, and I'm present physically, but I'm really not there. Emotionally, mentally, and I started to realize, and after a while, my wife, we've got, touch wood, quite a lovely relationship. She sat down and she said, look, you're not okay. Like, what's going on? And I was like, dude, I'm just tired. I'm just tired. And she's like, okay, but you coach a lot of people, and it's always a choice, is it not? And it's like, ouch. Yes. Like, yes, right in the feels. And from that point, she goes, so why are you choosing that? And that was a really powerful question, because usually what happens for me is like, and I imagine the average listener tuning in, because I've been in that place, is like, okay, now I've just got to go away and take that choice and take that action to be, Mr. Pep all the time. But really, I went further into that question and said, hey, why am I not choosing that? And it's like, because it doesn't feel like a choice. And it's like, what doesn't feel like a choice? Like, that's just my baseline. And I was like, this is my relationship with myself. Like, when I'm spent and I've got nothing left in the tank, it feels at times, it's just like, uh, you know, and then in that, sometimes there's some callous bits in there as well. It's like, why didn't you do that? Oh man, I dropped the ball on that again,
Sure.
you know? And I've been watching the languaging and I've just realized, oh, this is, and going back to focusing on the light, this feels like what they've called shadow work, right? It's like looking at, because the
Mm,
resilience has come down, the walls come down. I'm looking at like, oh, actually, I'm not the kindest person to myself when
mm,
I'm left to my own vices and all that. But behind the wall of resilience, I'm great. Yeah.
mhm,
But when that's all gone and stripped, it's like, and that's why I feel like it's a bit of a spiritual process of becoming a
mm,
father, because it's like, and I know my son's not going to do what I say. He's going to do what I do. So he can now see
mhm.
dad's, a belligerent, but he's like, he's like, I've got one of those dads, and it's like, actually, he doesn't want that from, he's like, thanks, dad, but can you end that programming? So I've been
Right.
looking at that and it's really been helping me realize I'm only as good to others as I really am good to myself. That whole you can only love others as much as you love yourself is it's a truism, but it also sounds super cheesy and I find some of them have very difficult access points. It's like, how do you actually access that? It's like love yourself more is such a big concept. So I've been finding, especially through your book, it's something as simple as be loyal to yourself. Can we start there? What does that mean to you?
Hmm. I imagine that you and other people listening know what it feels like to be loyal to somebody else,
Mm,
to be a good friend, to be an
mhm,
ally, to speak up if they're being pushed around by somebody, to come through for them, to deliver the goods. We know what that feels like. We know what that
mm,
sense of commitment, even duty, friendship, what that feels like. But to bring that same quality of clear eyed kindness and support to ourselves is foreign to many people. And to be clear, to be loyal to a friend can sometimes mean, just as your wife was loyal to you, pointing out maybe where they've gone off course,
mm,
or they might be unrealistic about something that, or that if they really want to accomplish it, gee, if you really want to write that book, you actually need to start writing words on a page or a screen or a tablet or something like, in other words, we can bring guidance to
mm,
ourselves. We can bring um, helpfulness to ourselves and encouragement and tenderness, depending on what's called for, just like we could to other people. And
mm.
in my experience, actually, that sense of being on your own side, being for yourself, being loyal to yourself, is missing in half the people when they walk in the door in my
Yeah.
clinical history, certainly, and probably at least half the people in the room if I'm teaching a workshop or online if I'm doing something. So it's in a really important place to start.
Mm,
Building on it in terms of core skills with other people, I find one of the most useful things that people can do when they feel like they're running on empty,
mm,
which is what you're talking about,
mm,
is to find what is for them and the other person a meaningful kind of refuge. In other
mm,
words, like right here, right now, we did not know each other before we started. We're on
mm,
screen. I can look
mm,
at you, you can look at me, and I can see the fundamental goodness in you. I can
mm.
see your good heart, your intentions, your seriousness of purpose. I can see that in you. And you probably can see some good in me, who knows? Well, when
Mm.
that has a
Definitely.
sense of mutuality in it,
Yeah.
it immediately starts filling up an empty cup, right?
Mm,
It's a kind of refueling. And just to finish, one of the things that's been so striking to me in the frame of making the relationships that we have to the extent possible, really,
mm,
making, it's that to make them usually involves very small things with what we
mm,
think or say that add up to something big over time. And
mhm,
those small moments, whether it's with you and your wife, your partner, looking at your child, looking out the window, taking a breath, or two or three, those small things really make a difference over time, for better or worse. There's a lot of research that shows that small, shitty things, if I could use that technical term, dropped into relationships really have a
That's
lot of impact.
yeah.
Tone, a word,
Mm,
an abrupt walking away, anything aggressive, an aggressive gesture,
mm,
again, situated in terms of, culture and so forth. Big, for me, I'm a big, tall man. For me
mm,
to be make an aggressive gesture with my arms, that
Mm.
lands hard, including
Mm.
on little children or, people such as women who are physically typically smaller, perhaps. So paying attention to the little negative things and editing them as much as possible, really helpful. And then also really making sure you start adding more useful, authentic, beneficial things into the space between you and another person. I have found that sense of the law of little things has been so
Mm.
helpful to me because it's hopeful, right? Big things are kind of
Yeah.
outside of my control. There's a saying in Tibet, if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. And
Oh,
that's been a really good guide.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And yeah, I can tell that that intention is so deep within you. It's like, again, the way you've written the book is like 50 little things that you can just access, and they're so doable. They're just so doable.
Yeah. And some of them are really quite blunt. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. Like, I've been a therapist a long
Yeah.
time, and it's made me both nicer and blunter in a sense, because, you just see people and you just cut to the chase. So for me, like the chapters, as you say, each one of them is a practice. So
Hmm.
they're framed as an instruction. Be loyal to yourself, see the good in others, see the being
Hmm.
behind the eyes,
Hmm.
forgive them, forgive yourself, or, for example, admit fault and move on,
Mm.
right? That's a really useful one. Or give them what they want to the extent that's reasonable, sustainable, especially when you're tired. Give them what they want. I find so many issues are resolved in relationships if people would just essentially go to the max on delivering the goods to the other person
Mm.
realistically and sustainably instead
Mm.
of sort of getting caught up in fighting with the other person,
Mm.
right? Or getting caught up in trying to change what's happening inside the black box of their mind, which is beyond your control.
Mm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
instead of getting all caught up in that, do what you can and nudge them. Ask for what you want. Be firm. Be clear. There's a lot in the book that's really works toward what do you do when you got to say the hard things?
Mm.
What do you do when you got to be tough minded?
Hmm.
Not physically tough, but tough minded. What do you do when you need to back out of a relationship or
Hmm.
resize it, shrink it? What do you really do? So you're definitely reserving your rights. But I just find that if we disengage from getting caught up in the war, I have a
Mm.
chapter called Get Out of the War in Your Head.
Hmm.
Get out of the war about that other person,
Yeah.
cut to the chase of, look, what can I do on my side of the street to
Hmm.
be a better husband, a better wife, a better partner, a better friend, a better worker, a better boss, a better, child to an aging parent? What can I do on my side of the street? And kind of relentlessly focus on it. It's
Mm.
fantastic. One, it gets them off your back.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Hmm.
Two, it makes you feel good, like you're focusing on where you do have power rather than
Mm.
trying to intervene inside their mind, where you have
Yeah.
powers in your own mind and in your words and deeds, right? It also puts you on the moral high ground. So when it's time a week or two or 10, or 3 later to say, hey, how about me? You're in a much stronger position to get
Mm.
that.
And
Pulls you out of dead end quarrels. Yeah, go on.
I'll say, and it fills up your own cup, like you
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
before. Even just
That's
that
right.
simple
Acting
exercise you did.
virtuously
Yeah.
feeds us.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to cut you off there, but
No,
anyway,
no, no. That was my.
yeah, yeah. So let me ask you a question. Can I
Mm.
turn it around here a little
Uh-oh.
bit?
Here we go.
All right,
Yep.
great. So here you go. So you went through the book. You saw the 50 chapter titles. They're all short. Each
Mm.
one's basically an instruction, a
Yeah.
practice. What you can do with your mind or your mouth to
Mm.
make a better relationship. Were there one or two that really popped out for you as
Yeah.
especially useful for you these days in all that you're dealing with?
Yeah. So there was one specifically, and I was actually, my next question is perfect because I was going to ask you about this one.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's I'm gonna paraphrase it, but I think you'll know which one I'm talking about. Is like you're gonna get criticized
Oh
anyway.
yeah, yeah, that's
and
right.
and you and I was gonna bring it up because you mentioned blunt, and that one really just hit me like square between the eyes.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
was
yeah. I think the
like,
chapter title is "Relax, You're Going to Be Criticized."
yeah.
It will happen.
So when you mentioned blunt, I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect. I'm bringing that up because I really. And then you asked me. So yeah, like that one was it was just really, actually it was, when you read something and it just sort of shifts something. I read it and it was just like,
Yeah.
oh, like it allowed me to just drop my defense mechanisms for a moment and just realize how much I was defending against that.
Yeah.
I
And
found
living
that,
in fear of it and playing small as a result,
oh,
or trying to control others so they don't, or yeah.
well, even just the people pleaser in me. There's such a people pleaser that's afraid of being criticized, that shows
Yeah.
up again and again, and I'm taking action from that place rather than a place which is just invested in deep connection where I can really fill up my own cup, you know?
Beautiful.
Um, yeah, that chapter was huge. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that chapter and make it less blunt than in the book.
Well, so it's great. Let's see. So first, that chapter comes around, I don't know what it is, maybe around number 30. So there's a fair amount of foundational stuff where you get in touch with your own worth, you get in touch with the kindness toward yourself, compassion for yourself. Okay, so it's on that foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I probably like you, maybe different childhoods, I don't know, but I've run scared of criticism.
Mm,
And so I grew up in a fault-finding home, loving but fault-finding, nurturing,
mm,
decent, critical
same.
parents. And so I just, got scared. And I was really young going through school, so I was an outsider most of the time, not particularly bullied, but invisible,
Mm,
unwanted, kicked to the curb. And that really landed hard on my own sense of worth. So I became really sensitive to feeling less than others or inadequate. So on that foundation, then I would just go overboard to make sure there was absolutely no basis for criticism from anybody toward
mm,
me, which was stressful on me and made me
mm.
kind of OCD-ish toward others, even though I'm not
Yeah.
naturally that way. That was not good. And it was really freeing for me to appreciate, that you may know this saying from Tibetan Buddhism that the worldly winds, the winds blow, right?
Mm,
Gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and ill repute. Um, and one is shame and praise and shame, praise and
mm,
blame, rather. So they all come, and blame, fair and unfair, is going to come our way. And so to me, the takeaway is just to realize, people are going to take issue with what you say and do. It's not perfect, and it's okay. We can relax around it. That's the point.
mm,
Relax. You're going to be criticized. And meanwhile, what can we do?
mm,
There's a term in psychology called locus of control. I don't know if you've heard it. It's, fancy,
mm,
but basically it means, where do we look for the navigator and
mm,
engine of our life? Do we look outside of ourselves for the navigators and the engines of our life, or do we look inside? And
mm,
yes, it's important to do what we can to create a village that truly does raise a child, to do what we can to help the world be more just and compassionate. Absolutely. But meanwhile, we have a tremendous and sacred power inside ourselves, that can inspire us, right?
mm,
And evolve us. And so for me, it's about kind of reclaiming power and bringing the power
mm.
back to yourself, and therefore judging yourself not so much on the audience and the ratings and the how many 5-star reviews, because as you well know, and I do too, so much of that is out of our control, but to judge ourselves based on that we've made our offering, the sincerity of that offering, the effort behind it, the learning around it, that there's actually a learning curve that's,
Mm,
has an upward slope, not just flat or downward, right?
mm,
That's how we judge ourselves. And,
mm.
if the criticism is valid, find what's useful in it, leave the rest, and keep coming back to what you know from the inside out about your own good heart, your own good efforts, and
Mm.
your own good learning along the way.
And that was one of the other biggest takeaways from that chapter for me was the invitation to just check in, like, don't, yeah, it's just so instructive the way you've written it. It's like, and again, I sounded a bit rude when I was like, don't be so blunt. It's actually written really well. It's like your defenses don't get in the way, and you
Oh,
just like
no.
you get exactly what you need. It's actually very beautifully written. So pardon me
Thank you.
for that.
Yeah.
It yeah, the piece around, okay, you've gotten the criticism, just take a pause, allow it to land. Is it even true?
Yeah.
If there is some truth in it, thank it maybe even, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If there's not, then just check in with your good human self, which is actually this term that's really been very present for me recently, good humaning.
Oh,
Like,
beautiful.
I've and it's been awesome. I've actually started running my business on it, which is, I'm digressing, but like people like, God forbid something happens to somebody, they can't do a whole 12 months worth of coaching, 6 months through, they've already paid for the 12 months. And it's like, okay, but they're not entitled to their money back. But it's like, what would good humaning feel like? And it's like,
Mm,
they didn't show up for the next 6 months, give them their money back. And it's like, yeah, let's do that. Like,
good for
even though they're
you.
not
Yeah.
entitled to it, and it's just these little things which is like good humaning. So, being a good human, it's like, am I a good human? And it's like, you check in and it's like, actually, yeah, I think I'm actually okay in that space.
Mm,
And it's like, okay, well then,
yeah.
moving on.
Yeah.
And it was just like so simple. It was like 4 pages, I think the chapter is, and it's just like,
Oh,
it's just
beautiful.
so
Yeah.
instructive, so handy, like literally.
Mm.
It's I really appreciated it. So thank you for writing that one specifically for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really appreciate
but I gotta tell you, man, I'm so,
it. Yeah.
I can go public finally. Your wife reached out to me
Yeah.
about 6 months ago, and she told me you need a special
I knew you were
chapter.
too big a guest to have on this podcast. I knew something was going on. It's her wielding her powers. There we go.
That's right.
I'll thank her. I'll thank her deeply. There's we're talking about things that are said at the moment, and we've mentioned things that we can do, and implement. But there's also this piece that echoes in the book about the unsaid,
Oh, yeah.
the things that don't get said.
Mm.
Can you share a little bit about what you mean by that, your awareness of that, some examples where you've seen that in your practice of
Oh,
where,
yeah.
where it's the unsaid? Because I think the book is an incredible tool for, hey, like this is in your literally micro 1% changes that you can show
Hmm.
up with. But
Yeah.
there's also there is another delta where it's like, I wanted to say, or I should have said, or I could have said, and we don't show up for that. Can you describe some of that?
Beautiful. Well, you know, if you think about relationships, there's a place for leaving certain things out. Okay. But on the
Mhm.
other hand, the weight of what's unsaid, what's pushed down, maybe,
Mm.
really starts to drive people apart and becomes, kind of a pile, sort of a wounded pile inside yourself. And so, one of the great paths for me in life has been to deliver my undelivered communications.
Mm.
Now, having gone through the 60s and 70s in the US with the height of the human potential movement, where we said everything to everyone all the time, with no filter. I've got out, which was good for me because I was,
That's called liberty, right? Sorry.
yeah, yeah. It was good for me initially because I was so filtered. But after that,
Mm.
I've kind of learned there's a place. Just because you think it doesn't mean you have to say it. Sometimes the best thing to do is to practice noble silence, as the saying has it, and just kind of let the pitches go by. People are throwing stuff our way a little bit like baited hooks. We don't have to
Mm.
take the bait. We can, just let it go by. On the other hand, to be able to speak from your heart and to
Mm.
finally get to something that's scary to say, but
Mm.
true, so that you are in your experience as you speak it. You're not just reporting on your experience like Spock, like a journalist from a faraway land, but you're
Yeah.
actually in your gut, you're in your heart,
Mm.
you're in your body while you say what's real for you.
Mm.
Very simple form, which I've borrowed from, you may know it, nonviolent communication is the form from
Ah.
Marshall Rosenberg. Yeah, bless his
Mm.
memory. When X happens, I
Mm.
feel or felt Y because I
Mm.
need Z. And you're
Yeah.
being very close to your own experience there. X described just, accurately, not when you are an asshole. No,
Mm.
no, no, no.
Mm.
Or B, I feel why. I feel hurt. Not I feel
Mm.
you are an idiot, but I
Yeah.
feel mad. I feel hurt. I feel frozen. I feel I don't know what to do. I feel like the ground of our relationship is sort of shaken, right?
Mhm.
Because I need Z, like any human does. Like I need to feel that you and I are good with each other and
Mhm.
that I can count on you for important things and that, you won't gossip about me behind my back, for example. So there's a place for being able to say what's important. including in intimate relationships. I find that, there's a place for a certain distance in a business setting. I have a business background too. It's not appropriate to spill your guts in a board meeting. Right? The kind of ranting that's appropriate at Burning Man or whatever the equivalent is for you all in Australia, a country I'm very fond of and have been to many times, by the way, including in Melbourne, your city. Stuff that might be appropriate there. Be careful. Let's say you're having dinner with the rellies, as it were, and you got to be kind of careful about it. But with people where you can kind of be real, if you really could be more real and you're not, you're stuck inside the bars of an invisible cage. And so much of relationships is pushing those bars back, one careful step at a time, to find the ground, the size of the ground you can really trust in. Much like in your own mind, so much of life practice is gradually pushing back the bars of the invisible cage inside you that alienates you from parts of yourself and buries down deep other parts of yourself.
What's present for me to ask is, how important is a healthy community for us to be able to explore? And when you start thinking, I reflect, and there's been times in my life where all there's been in my life is that corporate boardroom type of environment, and I haven't had a safe space really to express myself. Yes, I've had a partner in home, touch wood, I've been really blessed, but having environments in people that are conducive for me to basically speak the pieces that allow me to even just learn to exercise how to move some of those bars out. How much of a gift those people really can be in our lives, and how important actually in this conversation they are, would you say?
I think one of the most powerful gifts we can give another person is to see the good in them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You don't have to vote the way they vote necessarily, or do business with them, or go to bed with them, or stay in bed with them. You can see the good in them. You can see the good in them. And just think about the people who've really served you or served people listening here, in your life. Well, just think how much of a service you can offer to do that for others. So that's certainly part one. Part two, there's normal variation. I'm fairly introverted. I don't know you well. You might be a little more extroverted than I am by nature.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and people get benefit from certain things, like a major source of healing and inspiration and evolution for me has been being alone in nature, off trail, in wilderness, on my own, moving across the land. Other people, it's very important to be part of community. And so I just kind of want to mark that, range, normal range. It's okay. And to make sure that, we avoid the pitfall that some don't avoid, in which they make their own temperament and personality a kind of life principle for everybody else. And it's okay. There are differences here. But that said, we're profoundly social. And I do think about the teaching in early Buddhism. You may know it, kind of a famous moment in the passages in which the Buddha, who clearly was an introvert, I think, and fully prepared to be a wandering renunciate on his own, and spent a lot of time in solitary contemplation, was with his attendant and his cousin, Ananda, very close companion, with the gathering of other male monks at the time. And Ananda looked out and said, "Oh, look, noble sir, this is half the holy life." Ananda was, in effect, making a distinction between our outer world and our inner world. And the Buddha famously replied, "Not so, Ananda, not so. This field of practice in relationship is the whole of the holy life."
Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah.
I have to say, there was another chapter that really spoke to me in the book, and I'm finding it very present for me here now as well. And I couldn't let you go without asking about this specifically, because it is so counterintuitive, but I can see its application not the proof is in the pudding, but even just the way, I interview a lot of people and just the way you're coming across here today. So pardon me for putting you on the spot in that regards.
Sure.
But you're on the spot.
Turnabout is fair play, right?
Yeah, but you're on the spot. It's this softer tone, stronger impact. Super counterintuitive. And yet I can see how deeply, for me in my experience, how much easier it is to listen. And not other people aren't as easy to listen to. That's not true. But it's not what I would like to say, actually. But the softness of tone that you're employing in our conversation, things can really land. And I can really hear what you're saying.
I really am touched by that.
Yeah.
Really, I am. Thank you.
And I would love for you to share more about what you mean by softer tone, stronger impact, or stronger land. Yeah, can you take that further, please?
That's very perceptive too on your part, really. The freer we are inside, and the more heartfelt as our resting place, the more able we are to say what needs to be said with others without yelling about it, without pounding the table, without being threatening. And it has a greater impact. You're exactly right. What enables that directness and simplicity is a kind of inner freedom. So we're not so hijacked by our own reactivity, and we're resting in, as I am, and I feel you are as well, a fundamental goodwill and for the other person. And we're operating in good faith. When you're confident about those things, you don't have to shriek. You don't have to freak. Now, it may be natural, and I trust me, my wife would not say that I'm 100%, appropriate tone. I definitely can get a little cranky, especially when I'm like running on empty, like you said earlier in the beginning, tired and so forth. But how the key marker of both aerobic fitness and mental fitness is how rapidly we recover from kind of losing our balance.
Yeah, the bounce back factor. Yeah.
Exactly right. How rapidly can you cop to it?
Yeah.
Acknowledge you blew it. Okay, oops, sorry, correct. And rest in what it is you really want to say with dignity and gravity. There's a famous movie scene, please indulge me for it. It'll take about 30 seconds
absolutely.
to tell a story. Okay. It's Richard Pryor live at the Sunset Strip. This is like a 1980 movie. Pryor, you may know. Okay. It sounds like you do. Incredibly talented comic. He became a crack addict, and he was lighting a crack pipe once, and it blew up in his face, burned him badly. He nearly died. So he's now doing his first performance after he's gone through rehab and recovery and so forth. And he's mocking up a dialogue between himself and this American ex-football player, Jim Brown, who's this huge, very manly, very boom, force of nature kind of guy. Okay, so the dialogue basically goes, Richard Pryor says, hey, Jim, come on over. Why don't you party with me? And Jim goes, Richard, what you gonna do? And Richard goes, don't give me that attitude, Jim. I don't. Jim says, Richard, what you gonna do? Richard goes, hey, it's just fun. It's relaxing. I can quit tomorrow. No worries. Jim says, Richard, what you gonna do? And it just goes on like that. And the point is, Brown was not yelling at him. He was just bringing the truth. Confident, calm,
stable,
grave, loving, stable, gravitas. Thich Nhat Hanh, bless his memory, the great peace activist, beautiful, profound teacher. He was once described, I believe, as a combination cloud, butterfly, and bulldozer. Right? It's that bulldozer quality that's enabled by that cloudy spaciousness of awareness and that playful light butterflyness, right? That enables the bulldozer, and having a bulldozer quality also creates space for being airy and joyful and childlike even. It all
Yeah,
works together.
it's
Yeah.
incredible. It's incredible. Actually, that question, as heartfelt as it was from me, your wife actually called me 6 months ago when you were writing this chapter and told me to ask you this question.
Oh, that's good. You're messing with me. It's good. Very good.
Oh, Rick, I just, I could begin to thank you for your time here today, but really what I
Sure.
do want to thank you for that. And also, you've written a whole myriad of books. Yet this particular book, especially, I really want to thank you for having written it. Like I said, the way that you've written it, Inspired Evolution Tribe audience, you're tuning in. So we've covered the ground on 3 of 50 chapters, and I know in my bones that you've taken something away from this episode. We've covered so much depth within just those 3 topics that we've covered, and yet there's 50 such chapters. And they're 4 pages long each, like 3 to 4, some are 5. Like, please do yourself a favor. Where can people check out this book, Rick?
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. So frankly, I know about how it's published in the US. Technically, the Australian rights, they're called, in New Zealand, or the Commonwealth rights, come through England. And so there's another publisher, writer. I'm sure it's available where anybody buys books in Australia. Absolutely. So that's clear. I want to add that one of the things that for me was really important to bring into the book is basically how to get what you want from other people. And it's almost like a taboo subject. How do we get what we want? But we're constantly negotiating wants. You and I, we're kind of tossing the topic ball back and forth, the talking stick, if you will, back and forth. How do we negotiate what we're going to be talking about here? Whose turn is it? And so forth. It's just normal to do that. And everything goes great when you and the other person want the same thing. It felt extremely fluid and like we're co-creating this together. That's awesome. But what if you don't want the same thing? What if you and your wife want to raise your kid in different ways around certain things? You can no longer agree to disagree. Or you're working with some people and you got to make a decision, and maybe you want them to perform in certain ways that they haven't been, or they want you to. You're on the receiving of them, receiving end of them wanting something from you. What do you do? And I think a lot of people, when they're faced with another person who wants something from them, tend to reflexively withdraw, put up walls, counterattack,
recoil.
It can become a real deal. So one of the, for me, I just want to add it, important parts of the book was this exploration of how to get more of what you want in your relationships in ways that are respectful of others and sustainable and true to yourself. But how do you actually do that? How do you negotiate? How do you pin down what you want? Like, can't we be nice? Well, what does that actually mean? Right? How do you turn that into something that's clear? How do you know when the other person is actually agreed to give, to do what you want? And what do you do when they break their agreements with you the next time they show up 20 minutes late for a meeting or a lunch or a podcast interview? God help them. Never have them back, right? Anyway, so anyway, I just want to say that. The other thing I'll just add is people can learn more both about the Global Compassion Coalition at its website, and can learn more about me at my own website, rickhanson.net.
Perfect. I'll be putting those links into the show notes below, and access to the book. And my personal favorite is Audible, so you can always check it out there as well. And,
I read the book, by the way, and which is great because a fair amount of it, some of it is experiential practice, especially the parts where you go inward. And it was fun for me as the author to read the book in the studio and to, bring that kind of energy into it.
Connect back.
And I hope you'll forgive this kind of clap on the back, but having gone into the studio to read it maybe 10 months after I submitted the manuscript, that's kind of how it works. Honestly, I was really pleased with what I was reading. It didn't suck. I was afraid it was going to suck. And it was like, yeah, this is all right. It was reassuring, let me tell you.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, you'll notice that, it starts with your relationship with yourself. And if you can love what you've written, because there's so much space for the inner critic to show up there, the proof really is in the pudding. Rick, thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly here with us today. Really, on behalf of myself and the Inspired Evolution Tribe, wishing you all the best on your journey forward. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.